It has been over 3 years since China's President Xi Jinping announced the Belt and Road Initiative, China's grand strategy of mutual economic development, primarily the construction of much-needed infrastructure involving more than 60 countries, most of them developing, some of them among the least developed. Progress has been made, including the establishment of the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank and the Silk Road Fund. And the exploration and signing of numerous deals is an ongoing process. But how important really is the Belt and Road Initiative to China itself? In April of 2016, a special seminar was held in Beijing on the history of the Silk Road. Who attended and what they heard confirms indeed that the Belt and Road Initiative has highest priority and that following it keeps us closer to China. Eurasia, the greatest continent in the world, the cradle of several civilizations. Across this continent, there stands a network of routes that connect east and west, the ancient Silk Road. In September 2013, during his visit to Kazakhstan, China's President Xi Jinping proposed the Belt and Road Initiative.
为了使欧亚各国经济联系更加紧密，相互合作
To forge closer economic ties, deepen cooperation, and expand development in the Eurasia region, we should seize the initiative and together build an economic belt along the Silk Road. This great undertaking will benefit people in every country along the route.
The Silk Road Economic Belt, together with a 21st century maritime Silk Road, covers more than 60 countries. According to President Xi, the initiative focuses on connectivity and cooperation. To promote the initiative, on April 29, 2016, some 60 senior Communist Party leaders gathered in Beijing. They attended a group study session on the history of the ancient Silk Road. Their attendance demonstrates for all to see that 3 years after it was first proposed in 2013, the Belt and Road Initiative remains high on China's priority list. The guest speaker at this session with these political heavyweights was Professor Li Guoqiang, Deputy Director of the Institute of Chinese Borderland Studies in the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. To learn more about the Politburo study session and its implications, I speak with Li Guoqiang, Deputy Director of the Institute of Chinese Borderland Studies at the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. I also speak with Yang Zhongwei, Director of the Center for Development Strategy and Public Policy at the Chinese Academy of Governance, and Xu Huayong, Dean of the International Business School at Beijing Foreign Studies University.
Sometime in February, I was invited to give a speech on these two concepts during the Politburo's collective training. I started my preparation before the Spring Festival and finally gave my speech specifically on this topic on April the 29th to General Secretary Xi Jinping, 50-plus ministers, as well as other central leaders in the 31st collective session.
About how many people attended?
More than 60.
How long did the session last?
Nearly 2 hours.
As you look at the history of both the continental Silk Road over land and the maritime Silk Road, and you see the ups and downs of trading, what lessons can you learn in terms of international trade, and are those lessons of the ancient times applicable today?
Actually, when we look back to the ancient Silk Road, both on land and by sea, we can draw many conclusions regarding its emergence, development and demise, which offers us a lot of lessons for reference in developing the current Belt and Road Initiative. For example, in peaceful times, China and other countries along the road enjoyed stability and bilateral trade greatly prospered. Likewise, in the Han and Tang dynasties, China was highly united. Its economy was highly advanced. In the meanwhile, Western countries were also enjoying social peace with booming economies. So countries shared a common need to trade and exchange. As for the down periods, they often occurred when social instability plagued the countries. Therefore, we say peace and stability is a very critical element for trade prosperity. The second precondition for prosperity along the route is economic development. When the economy of China and other countries along the Silk Road develops, there arises the need and desire for trade. Without a growing economy, what do they have to trade with you? This is how history works. Therefore, economic prosperity is a great facilitator, an important foundation and premise for development of the Silk Road.
There are obvious differences between the ancient Silk Roads and the modern Belt and Road Initiative. Today's a Belt and Road Initiative, we're dealing with mega projects. We're dealing with power plants and energy facilities and airports and high-speed railways. And these are mega billion-dollar kind of projects that are more promoted by governments to build the country. So how do you limit the application of the ancient Silk Roads to today so that we don't kind of emphasize what the history was, because in many cases we're dealing with what we call sui generis issues today, which they've never happened before because of the nature of modernity.
我并不这么看，我是认为从历史上它有2000年的历史，我们去考察之后，我
I don't think so. After looking into the 2,000-year history, back into reality, we can see more than 60 countries involved along the route, most of them emerging or developing countries, which have strong demands for economic development. In fact, if we look closely at these 60-plus countries, though they differ in system, economic level, and resource endowment, they share strong pursuits of development. At both ends of the Silk Road stand two large economies, China and Europe. In today's international community, China is home to the most vibrant economy. Under such circumstances, among countries along the route, we see many less developed, poor countries with tarnished reputations. In these cases, those countries imply a strong desire for development to scale up their economic growth. In fact, these countries have put aside factors of social stability or regional security, as it is difficult for them to reach economic growth targets on their own in such a short period of time. It's a big problem. For example, we know in Asia there's a strange phenomenon. On the one hand, capital stock is huge, while on the other hand, the infrastructure in some countries lags seriously behind. In Asia alone, how much investment is needed for infrastructure? Nearly $800 billion US. At this moment, neither the World Bank nor any Asian bank has the capacity to satisfy such demand in the infrastructure development in Asia. That's why we have Belt and Road Initiative and the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, or AIIB. AIIB is inclusive. It's open because it aims to invest in Asian infrastructure together with World Bank organizations and Asian bank organizations to upgrade the basic infrastructure in those countries. In China, there's a saying that goes, to get rich, build roads first. When the roads and infrastructure are well established, future development can enjoy further improvements. Under such circumstances, in fact, I'm optimistic. Many countries along the route, large or small, no matter what economic stage they are at, have a perpetual socio-economic growth appetite. There's always potential to fulfill. There is huge potential between the cooperation and common development of China and countries along the route.
Triangle, circle, or both? A story can take on a whole new meaning when looked at from a different perspective. I'm Liu Xin. Join me as I seek the hidden truth, asking direct questions to get answers that are to the point. Challenge your perceptions, Monday through Friday on CGTN, and get to the point.
Such enormous demands require funding and investment in Asia's infrastructure. To meet this need, in October 2013, during a visit to India, China's President Xi Jinping proposed a new initiative, the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, or AIIB. The AIIB, as an intergovernmental financial development institution, would have as its priority to support infrastructure construction aimed at improving regional connectivity and economic integration in Asia. The proposal for the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank received a positive response from dozens of countries. On January 16, 2016, after more than 800 days of preparatory work, the AIIB was officially founded in Beijing. It was the first multilateral financial institution established as a result of a Chinese initiative. China makes it clear that as global investment platforms, the Silk Road Fund and the AIIB are both open to the entire world.
We've initiated investments in Asian countries. Within 6 months of the launch, we gave approval for 4 projects. These projects have a positive impact on economic development for our Asian members. But our members aren't only Asian countries. There were also members from Africa, Latin America, and Central and Eastern Europe. If an infrastructure project in these countries will help promote economic development in Asia, we'll also provide loans to these countries. So this isn't a regional bank just for Asia.
Some are suspicious. Why would China institute a program that would serve the interests of others? What about disputes and conflict and legal regulations? Today we have a commercial law, we have a court system. If people are unhappy with a contract or disagree, they sue each other and it gets adjudicated by the courts. None of that would be possible with the Silk Road, such long periods of time between them. So how did they do dispute? How did they deal with disputes? And what was the dispute adjudication system?
这个问题非常的好的，我想呢，这就是我们要汲取的
That's a good question. I believe that is a lesson we should learn from. Why did the Silk Road go into a decline? Why did the ancient Silk Road wither away? The reasons are multifold. One reason was because there was no such mechanism. Neither China nor other countries along the route had a mechanism building on trade management. That's a lesson drawn from history. Going forward, in managing the Belt and Road Initiative, we must effectively connect our communications, trade and finance mechanisms. It's crucial for regional economic integration in the future. I believe this is progress in modern thought. It could make a difference.
How do you account for the fact that over the last few years in particular, the anti-globalization voice in the world has been getting louder in Europe, in the US, different countries, seemingly against their economic interests in terms of comparative advantages in economics. But why do you think the anti-globalization forces have been getting stronger?
因为我觉得这个全球化或反全球化
I feel that globalization and anti-globalization have gone hand in hand since the very beginning. Globalization is about openness. There will be beneficiaries and victims. From an economic point of view, the whole world, generally speaking, benefits. For instance, the beneficiary gets 10 points. The victim loses 4 points. In aggregate terms, the whole world wins 6 points. But for the victim, 4 points are lost. The victim could be within one country or among countries. Logically speaking, the victims must be against globalization. Anti-globalization was there since the very beginning. It's nothing new. Let's look at anti-globalization from another perspective. Some people are against globalization not necessarily because globalization is bad, but globalization needs relevant governance to offer the victims with some appropriate compensation. For example, when China opened up to the outside world increasingly wider in the globalization process, there surely were victims for whom we implemented reallocation policies. For instance, I joined the Pairing Assistance Program, a unique feature of China. It provided free subsidies in Qinghai province, including enterprises who made subsidies. This is an approach of reallocation. Globally, however, global governance is in need of such reallocation approaches. To put it in a Chinese way, this is the difference between a country and a wealthy country. So in my opinion, I believe what we need to do is to improve global governance, not go against globalization itself.
There's no question that comparative economics say that globalization makes sense and the totality of the incremental wealth generated by globalization, comparative economics is for sure right, but it is misaligned. It's not perfectly given to all countries and all peoples equally. But it's very difficult in the world to make those kinds of compensations. How do you propose to do that?
Reallocation is mainly about adjusting stock capital. I believe, more importantly, we need to have a bigger stock. As for development, a while ago, my team and I undertook independent research to evaluate the global Gini coefficient, a coefficient to measure the global wealth gap. The number was shockingly above 0.7 around the globe. The number measured by experts with World Bank was almost the same. We know for a country, the Gini coefficient above 0.4 is pretty high. Above 0.7 means a wide wealth gap. Above 0.6 means dangerous inequality, which may lead to turbulence and unrest. The global Gini coefficient of 0.7 is way too high. To narrow the wealth gap, I believe a huge potential lies in the development of developing countries. In my perspective, the development of developing countries is different from the past. There used to be a mentality of a North-South conflict or contradiction, which is quite harmful. The best way is to seek North-South win-win cooperation. To give a simple example, China relied on capital of advanced countries in its development. A growing China with larger markets enabled more developing countries to grow. That is why China is pushing for industrialization in Africa and other related countries. We know many wealthy countries have entered the post-modernization information society. However, there are many countries that are far from industrialization and urbanization, let alone marching into the information and modern society. So I believe we should inject more capital into infrastructure building, such as electricity and industry, narrowing the information gap of developing countries. In that way, developing countries will enjoy faster growth, and developed countries have new markets for their capital, getting new space. For countries including China, in my perspective, the service sector should open wider. With a more open service sector for developed countries such as the United States, they can get better performance in China's markets, which will contribute to the development of the service sector in China while enabling more growth space for developed countries such as the U.S.
The concept of people before profit is said to be deeply rooted in Chinese culture, and no one demonstrates the concept better than the great Chinese voyager Zheng He. In the course of his 7 voyages, Zheng He brought friendship and knowledge as well as trade to more than 30 countries and regions. His was one of the most remarkable endeavors in the history of the maritime Silk Road. It was not until some 50 years after Zheng He's voyages that Vasco da Gama, Christopher Columbus, and Ferdinand Magellan, through their expeditions, heralded the age of discovery in the West. However, the discovery of the New World and the opening of new sea routes set the European powers on the path of colonial expansion and trade monopolies. Some worry that China's new initiative constitutes a new form of colonialism. You did not mention raw materials, energy, oil, various kinds of metals that China imports. And in fact, I have found a sensitivity in China to want to talk about that, as if it'll sound exploitative or neo-colonialist. But when you don't talk about it, then that's when people begin to think that you're hiding something. But why not recognize that one of the main benefits to China is access to raw materials, which China needs, especially oil. It needs diversified sources because there's a lot of instability in oil-rich countries.
Well, traditionally, Chinese economy growth, as I said, is more energy resources consumed, made in China, too much made in China, and then sells to the world. Now we should change this economic growth model as industrialization, not just use the oil or materials in Africa, in Central Asia, but invest in that kind of areas to help them to build more factories, economic zone. And then not necessarily need we import too much oil from the Middle East, from Central Asia, but build factories there. So this will change that kind of model. Of course, energy connections, mutual connectivity is very important for that kind of Belt and Road considerations.
Are you concerned that there are some voices in Belt and Road countries, particularly in Africa, that look to the future and see themselves becoming dependent on China in a so-called neo-colonialist way, not occupying the country, but having a dependency relationship in terms of the flow of trade?
No. Belt and Road Initiative is not doing that way. In the former time, the African countries provide materials, energy to European countries in a very cheap price. When they import high technology products, cost a lot. So this is unfair for them. Now they want to change this model. They want to attract more Chinese investment in Africa in three aspects. Number one, high-speed railway, highway, and regional air network. For a long, long time, African countries, even your neighbor, you should change the flight from Paris to reach your neighbor. But now we should change this situation. Let the industrialization happen in Africa, not African be marginalized of the globalization. So African countries now very welcome the Belt and Road Initiative. In the former time, African countries only asked money, donation, foreign assistance. Now they need investment, need industrialization to change this you mentioned model.
Are you worried at all that some voices, though, are concerned about this perpetual dependency on China? Have you heard that?
Maybe some Africans impacted by the old mentality. They want China will repeat the same model as the Europeans' former colonial period did. But after, that's the Belt and Road. We said we should learn the lessons, including the lessons of the African European relations, not do the same thing. This is 21st century. So the keywords of the Belt and Road is 21st century, the new model for cooperation. I think if we did the same as the European did, not so many welcome and not sustainable in Africa, in other countries.
What was the relative power of the parties during the ancient Silk Road and maritime Silk Road? Because today there is some concern in the world that in the Belt and Road Initiative, China is such a massive, powerful country in population, in economics, in military capabilities, that the negotiating power that China has with many small countries is very lopsided and will maybe get even more as China continues to grow. So in terms of the relative power between the parties, what can we learn from the ancient Silk Road that can help China today?
In my view, such an idea didn't apply to any period in history, not even today. When did China enjoy its greatest strength and prosperity? In the Han and Tang dynasties. The Chinese call it the prosperous golden era of Han and Tang. How strong and prosperous was China back then? China's socio-economic development led the world in an all-round way. Unique across the international community. No country could possibly rival it. Therefore, we say China's civilization had reached an unprecedented level in history. But even in such cases, the Emperor of China still kept reminding his officials to treat kindly the envoys and merchants along the route, offering them care and convenience, as well as other forms of kindness.
Reflecting on the history that you've studied for so long, what advice would you give to officials today, and not your lecture to the Politburo, just independently, to optimize the chances of success? Because the modern world is very much more complicated than, of course, the ancient world of the old Silk Road, and yet some of the human principles are the same.
我想呢，这个通过历史我来考察的话，看到
Referring to history, we know that in fact the formation and development of the ancient Silk Road was not the achievement of China alone. One single country does not create such splendid glory. And looking at the success of the maritime Silk Road, trade from the east to the west was made to flow by China, and the route from the west to the east was thanks to the Arab navigators. If there is only China that wants to export its goods, and no other countries along the route that want to join in the exchange of personnel and merchandise, there will be no chance for prosperity and development of the Silk Road. Therefore, what I want to say is, be it in history or during the current era, the Silk Road has never been and will never be exclusively enjoyed by China. It is a shared cause for China and all the countries along the route.
And what were some of the specific problems that you discussed, the historical problems that may have some relevance for today?
Some
people thought there were no politics in history. It seems the government played only a small part in the development of the Silk Road. The civil public played a major role alone. In fact, my studies tell a different story. In history, the government played a leading role in road maintenance, safeguarding peaceful environment, policy communications, and setting behavioral standards. That's to say, the government played its part on both the system and governance fronts. Surely in history, there was private trading along the Silk Road. It was an essential character of the ancient Silk Road. People of various walks of life participated in trade. Businessmen, general public, envoys, people of different ethnicities and colors traded along the Silk Road. The trade back then covered wide areas: agriculture, handicrafts, and other industries. That was not only the case for China, but for all other countries along the route. For a flourishing ancient Silk Road, diverse participants were essential. The government alone was not good enough. Without government, it was no good, but government alone was not sufficient. The force promoted and pushed the ancient Silk Road to undergo continuous prosperity. And the main participants, in my opinion, were businessmen, dealers, and people from all other walks of life, as we have just said. So learning from history, we must emphasize both the leading role of government and diversified participants in the Belt and Road Initiative.
That the entire Politburo and other senior officials spend serious time listening to a scholarly lecture on the history of the Silk Road corroborates the overarching importance of the Belt and Road Initiative. This linkage of past and present helps us to appreciate how China's leaders think. After all, to my knowledge, no other country so clearly roots a contemporary policy in its historical tradition. China considers itself a civilization state with a continuous culture, and part of that culture, China says, is outreach and trade, but not occupation and colonization. As China enlarges its global economic footprint, there will be challenges. China will need to consider how to protect its overseas assets and, more important, its overseas workers. Some may question China's motives, suggesting a new kind of mercantile neocolonialism where China extracts raw materials and injects manufactured goods. China is sensitive to these challenges. So are we, keeping closer to China.